My name is Myra Ingalls, and I'm 34 years old. 2 months ago, I sat at a table for 9 in the most expensive steakhouse in Columbus, and I was the only one who ordered nothing but water. My family had not called me in 3 years. Not a birthday, not a Christmas, not one text. Then my dad called on a Tuesday night and told me to be there Saturday at 7. They ordered a lobster tower, 4 plates of thermidor, and two $400 bottles of wine. The bill came to $6,120. My dad slid it across the tablecloth with 2 fingers, slow, the way you push a plate you're finished with. And he told me I was paying, because I owed them. I paid for my water. Then I stood up, and the room went dead quiet. But the dinner wasn't the ambush. The dinner was the invitation to the ambush. And what I found in my old bedroom 11 days later is the part I still can't say out loud without stopping. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge. This is where we sit with the quiet ones, the daughters and sisters who paid for years and were never counted as family, and the hour they stopped. If you have ever been the person everybody calls when the money runs out, you already know how this table feels. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. The call came in at 7:40 on a Tuesday. I was standing in my kitchen with a chart bag still on my shoulder, and my dad's name came up on the screen for the first time in 3 years, and I answered it because my thumb moved before I did. He didn't say hello, he said, Saturday, 7. Ambrose and Vine, downtown. Bring nothing. That's how my father talks. 31 years installing industrial flooring made him a man who assigns tasks, instead of asking questions, and he has never once in his life said the words, "Are you free?" I said, "Okay." He hung up before I finished the second syllable. I stood there with the phone still warm, and did the arithmetic I always do, which is the arithmetic of what this is going to cost me. 3 years is a long time to be a person nobody types. No card when I turned 32. Nothing when I turned 33. My Aunt Faye posted photos from Easter 2 springs ago with 11 people in the frame and a folding table added on the end for the kids. So I knew what a summons smells like. I knew it the way you know a patient is about to crash before the monitor tells you. And I still said yes, because I had something I wanted to say to my father's face, one sentence I had been carrying for 3 years, and you cannot say a sentence to a man who does not open the door. In my coat pocket that Saturday there was a sheet of paper folded into quarters. I had printed it at work, at the desk by the supply closet, and I had folded it twice so nobody could read it over my shoulder. I did not take it out at that table. Not once. I want you to remember that it was there. Ambrose and Vine keeps a private room in the back, with one long table and a light fixture that looks like a chandelier had an accident. I got there at 6:50. My apartment is 12 minutes away in Clintonville, second floor, and I still got there early because being early is the only power a person has in a room like that. They came at 7:15, all of them at once, because they had driven down from Marion together in 2 cars. 47 miles up 23, 9 chairs. My dad, Ray, 63. My mom, Loretta, 61, in a good blouse, holding her purse on her lap like a woman waiting at a bus stop. My brother, Dean, 30. His wife, Steph. Steph's daughter, Hallie, who is 16 and who I had met exactly twice. Aunt Faye and Uncle Gil. And Denny Koval, who poured concrete beside my father for 30 years and laughs at things that are not funny yet. Nobody stood up when I walked in. Faye looked at my sweater and said, "Oh, sweetheart. You came straight from work. That's fine. Nobody minds." The server asked what I'd like to drink. I said, "Sparkling water. That's all." My dad looked at me for one full second. Not angry. The way a foreman looks at a truck that showed up with the wrong load. Then he turned back to the menu and kept going. My mother leaned over to Steph and said, in her polite voice, "Is she staying for the whole dinner?" She was 3 feet from me. She said she. A little over 2 years earlier, my mother had been diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's, and I found out the way you find out about people who have cut you off, which is a church prayer list email I have never had the heart to unsubscribe from. Here is what I have learned about how people order food when they know they are not paying for it. They order out loud. My dad started with the lobster tower for the table, the tall one on crushed ice that comes with its own stand, and then he went around and ordered for everyone, and then he ordered 4 plates of Thermidor because Denny said he'd never had it. And then he took the wine list, held it out at arm's length the way men do when they will not buy reading glasses, and read the name of a $400 bottle out loud, slowly, and then read it again. "We'll take 2 of those." Denny whistled. Dean lifted his glass before there was anything in it and said, "To family." And everybody said it back except my mother, who was folding her napkin into a smaller and smaller square. I watched the check build the way I watch a monitor. That is not a metaphor I am proud of. It is just what my brain does after 12 years of nights. 4,000 in seafood. 800 in wine. Nobody looked at the right-hand column, not once, and there is a particular kind of joy in a room where nobody looks at the right-hand column. My mother ate almost nothing. She cut a piece of lobster into 6 pieces and moved them around the plate and asked me twice if the shrimp were cold, and both times I said yes, ma'am, and both times she said good. That's good. And smiled at me with no idea who I was. Then Faye put her hand on my wrist and said, "You're doing so well down here, honey. Ray says you're opening a place. 2 beds, is it?" I had not told one person in that family about the 2 beds. Not one. After that, the questions came, and every single one of them had the same shape. How long does a license like that take? Do you have to own the building, or can you rent? What does a place like that rent for? Did you have to put money down? Is that the kind of thing a bank does, or do you have to have it in hand? Steph asked what the beds cost. Gil asked if I'd need a car for it. Faye asked kindly whether a person could get insurance on a business that small and then said, "Because you'd hate to lose it." Every question was about the same thing wearing a different coat, and the thing was, how much can she reach? I gave shorter answers, then barely answers at all. Then I gave the answer I give families at 2 in the morning, which is a small nod that means I heard you, and I am not going to say more. And the whole time, my father did not ask me anything. He ate. He refilled Denny's glass. He asked the server about the crust on the halibut. The only person at that table who wanted the number did not ask for the number, and if you have ever been in a negotiation, you already know what that means. Then Steph, who is not cruel, just tired, said something to Dean about a bed frame, and Dean said something back, and Steph said, "Well, the room's ready, so," and stopped. She stopped the way you stop when a foot finds yours under a table. Hallie looked up from her phone for the first time all night. I said, "What room?" And my father said, "Eat your dinner, Myra." That was the first sentence he had spoken to me in 3 years. The check came in one of those leather folders, and the server set it down in the middle of the table, which is what a good server does when 9 adults have not made it clear who is in charge. Nobody reached. Denny made a joke about needing a second mortgage and laughed alone. My father opened the folder and he did it slowly, and he angled it so the top edge caught the light, and I could read it from where I sat because I have spent my whole adult life reading numbers upside down across a bed. Food and drink, $4,800 even. Sales tax, $360. Then a line I had not thought about, because I do not eat in rooms like that. Gratuity added automatically at 20% for parties of 8 or more, $960. Total, $6,120. My father looked at that total for a while. He did not wince. He closed the folder, put 2 fingers on the corner, and pushed it across the tablecloth toward me. It made a sound. That's the part nobody tells you about. The little dry hiss of leather on linen in a room that has gone quiet. It came to a stop against the base of my water glass. "You're paying," he said. "You owe us." 9 people. 8 of them were not me. Not one of them said a word. My Aunt Faye put down her fork with the care of a woman who does not want to miss anything. My brother examined his own hands. Steph looked at the wall. Hallie, 16 years old, stared into a plate of food she had barely touched and did not look up. And I have thought about that girl's face more times in the last 2 months than I have thought about my father's. My mother said, "Is there dessert?" I did not raise my voice. I have never raised my voice at my father, not once in 34 years, and I was not going to start in a rented room with a chandelier. I asked him the only question worth asking. "Oh, you what exactly?" And my father, who had been waiting 3 years for somebody to hand him that door, went down the list. The shoes in 7th grade. The good ones. Because I asked. Driver's ed. The 6 months I lived at home after I graduated, which was actually 4 months, and I worked nights the whole time and bought the groceries, but I let it stand. The car insurance until I was 20. Then he got to the end of the list and his voice dropped into the register menus for things they believe are self-evident. "And the house," he said. "The house we kept over your mother's head." Everyone at that table knew exactly what he meant by that, and I was the only one who knew what it actually meant, and that gap is the whole reason I am telling you this. Then he said the thing he has said my entire life, the sentence that is stitched into the inside of that family like a label in a coat collar. "Family is the only insurance we ever had." Faye said amen, out loud, in a steakhouse. I looked at my mother, who was watching the chandelier, and I thought about the folded paper in my coat pocket. And I understood that there was no version of that room where anybody heard the sentence I came to say. So I did not say it. I lifted one finger and the server came over, and I asked him, in a completely ordinary voice, if he could ring my water on a separate check. He said, "Of course, ma'am," and he went to do it. And behind me, the whole table understood what was about to happen about 4 seconds too late. My check was $9.68. Sparkling water is $9 in that room, and Franklin County takes 7.5% of everything, and I want you to hold that number next to the other one for a second. 6,120. 968. I put a 20 on the little tray. I did not say it to the table because the table had not earned a sentence. I said it to the server. 968 is mine, the rest is yours. He said thank you very quietly, the way people do when they have decided whose side they are on. Then I stood up. I want to be honest about what happened next, because it is the reason this story exists. Denny Koval stopped in the middle of a word. My aunt set her wineglass down and made no sound with it at all, which takes practice. My father did not move a muscle in his face, and my brother said, "Myra," once, and then didn't finish. And my mother, 61 years old, in her good blouse, looked up at me with the warmest, most well-mannered expression you have ever seen on a human being, and said, "Thank you so much for coming." Like I had dropped off a casserole. I said, "You're welcome, Mom." Then I walked out through the main dining room, past 40 strangers eating their dinner, and I did not hurry, because I was not being chased. I was on level 2 of the garage with my key in the door, when I heard shoes running on concrete. Dean. Out of breath. No coat. His phone in his hand. He said my name twice. Then he said, "Mom's sick, Myra. Bad. It's not what you think it is." And then, while I was still trying to get my mouth to work, he said the thing that took the whole night and turned it into something else. "And you're already in this deeper than you know. Check your bank in the morning." I sat in that parking garage for 11 minutes before I turned the key. If you have ever walked out of a room and known all the way down that the room was not finished with you, then you know exactly what that quiet sounds like. Tell me in the comments, would you have paid the $6,000 just to keep the peace? I want to know. And subscribe, because the part that actually broke me is still coming. I did not check my bank in the morning. I checked it at 4 minutes past 6, sitting in the lot behind the home health office with the engine off and a coffee I didn't want, because I had not slept and there was no point pretending. The folded paper from my coat was on the passenger seat. It was a printout of every payment on a line of credit, $412 a month, 36 months in a row, and the sentence I had carried into that steakhouse was going to be, "I have been paying you this whole time, Dad." I never got to say it. And after that morning, I never wanted to. And I did not open my checking account. I opened the other one. 10 years ago, I put my name on a home equity line of credit secured by my parents' house in Marion, Ohio, and that account has lived in my banking app ever since, like a tumor on a scan you keep rereading. $60,000 limit. 3 names on it: Ray Ingalls, Loretta Ingalls, Myra Ingalls. It loaded, and there were 3 lines in red at the top of the screen. Past due. 3 payments. Balance. $58,900. I read it 4 times. Then I opened my email and found the credit alert I had been ignoring for a month because I get 4 of those a week, and they are almost always somebody trying to sell me a score. And this one said my score had dropped 96 points in 4 weeks. 96. I have a nursing license, a spotless payment history, and a business loan sitting in underwriting. And I had spent 3 years quietly protecting exactly one thing, which was that number. The dinner was $6,000 of theater. It was not the play. I want to be clear about the size of what I was looking at in that parking lot, because it took me about 90 seconds to understand it, and it will take you less. The bill on that tablecloth was $6,120, and it did not matter. $58,900 was in my name, and it had been in my name the entire 3 years I thought I had gotten out. 10 years ago, my father fell through a bad section of subfloor on a plant job in Lima and landed on a steel pallet edge with his lower back. He was 53. 2 surgeries, one of which helped. 31 years of putting down industrial flooring ended in a hallway outside a radiology suite, and the man who came home was a man with no trade and a mortgage. They were 4 months behind by August. They had bought that house in 1991, and there was about $31,000 left on the original mortgage, so the bank in Marion offered them a home equity line of credit against it, $60,000, and the plan was to pay the old mortgage off entirely, clear the medical bills, and be left with 1 payment instead of 5. It worked, on paper. When it was done, there was exactly 1 lien on that house, and it had my name on it. The problem was income. There wasn't any that a bank would count, so they needed another name on the paper. I was 24 years old. I had been a registered nurse for 2 years, all nights, and I made $49,000 a year and had $1,100 in savings. And to a lender, I was the healthiest number in that family. We sat in a small room with a table that wobbled and a coffee pot that had been on since morning. The loan officer put a tab on the 3rd line and said, "Right here, Miss Ingalls." My mother was crying quietly into a tissue she had brought from home. And my father, who has never in my life said the words thank you to me before or since, put his hand flat on my shoulder and left it there while I signed, and he said, "Thank you, Myra. I want to tell you I signed it because I was young and stupid. That would be easier. I signed it because my mother was going to lose the house she was sitting in, and I was the one who could stop it. And I have never once in my life been able to be the person who couldn't. Now I need to tell you about the 2 times I tried to get out, because otherwise, you will spend the rest of this story thinking I let it happen. When I was 27, I called the bank and asked to have my name removed. The woman on the phone was very kind about it. A co-borrower cannot be removed from a line of credit. Ever. The only way off is a refinance in the remaining borrowers' names alone, and that requires the remaining borrowers to qualify and to sign. I paid $550 out of my own account for the appraisal. I booked the appointment. I drove up to Marion and sat in that bank lobby for 50 minutes, and my father did not come. And when I called the house, he said the payment was fine, and he wasn't going to sign paperwork so a bank could raise his rate. When I was 29, I sat with a lawyer in Worthington at $300 an hour, and she was honest with me in the first 12 minutes, which is worth every dollar. I had 2 options. I could sue my parents for contribution and get a judgment against a house, or I could force a sale of the collateral. That was it. Those were the doors. Both of them ended with my mother standing on a lawn in Marion, Ohio, watching a truck get loaded. So I took the 3rd door, which was not really a door. I set up an automatic payment from my own account for the minimum, $412 a month, and I stopped answering the phone. And I told myself that if I paid it forever and never spoke to them again, nobody would ever be able to touch me. 3 years of that, $412 a month, on time, every month. Which raises a question, and I would like you to ask it now, because I asked it in that parking lot. If I had autopay, how were there 3 missed payments? 41 minutes on hold. I took it in an empty patient room between visits with the door shut and my badge turned around. The woman who finally picked up had the flat, careful voice of somebody who has read a lot of bad screens to a lot of people, and she walked the account history backward for me while I wrote on the back of an intake form. 14 months ago, a co-borrower called in and applied for a hardship deferral. 6 months, no payments due, interest continues to accrue. Approved on the phone the same day. And when a hardship plan goes on an account, she said, scheduled automatic payments are suspended because the system is not going to keep pulling money from a household it just declared to be in hardship. Statements and notices go to the address of record for the collateral property. The collateral property is a 3-bedroom house on Bellefontaine Avenue in Marion, Ohio, and I have not had a key to it in 3 years. I said, I have online access. I check it. She said, yes, ma'am. During an approved plan, the portal displays no payment due. I said, I called twice during those 6 months. She looked. She said, I see the notes. Both times you were told the account was in an approved plan and no action was needed. That was accurate. Then the deferral ended, and the payment came due again, and my autopay was gone, and nobody in that house wrote a check, and the interest that had been piling up for 6 months landed on the balance, and it went 30 days, then 60, then 90. I sat in that empty room with a chart pen in my hand and understood exactly what my family was. Not liars. Something colder and much more organized than liars. A debt with a last name. Then my work phone buzzed with an email and the subject line was from the bank underwriting my business loan. I should tell you what I was building, because it matters to the arithmetic later. Ingalls Home Care. 2 beds, licensed, in a ranch house in Grandview, with a ramp already poured and a bathroom already wide enough. Not a facility. 2 people in a real house, with 1 nurse who knows both of their names and does not have 41 other patients. 6 years of night differential went into it. No vacations, 1 car with 190,000 miles, and a business savings account with $61,400 in it. 6 weeks before that dinner, an $85,000 loan had come back pre-approved. I signed a lease on the house, $9,000 in deposits, first month and last, and a pet clause I fought about for nothing. I hired 2 people, Nadine Pruitt, 44, a state-tested nursing assistant who is better at this job than anyone I have ever worked beside, and Tomas Reyes, 27, who has a 5-year-old and a plan. Both of them gave notice at their old jobs. The email said, pending credit review, a phrase that means a person in an office somewhere has pulled your report and found a 90-day delinquency on a $58,000 secured line and now has to decide what kind of risk you are. I read it in the parking lot of an assisted living center on Henderson Road with a bag of dressing supplies on the seat beside me. And here is the part I did not let myself think until later that night. Everything I had spent 6 years building was sitting on top of 1 number, and 1 phone call from my father had reached up through 10 years and moved it. Then my phone rang, and it was a Marion area code, and it was not my dad. It was Dean. 11 days after that dinner, I drove up to Marion, 47 miles up 23, 55 minutes if the lights in Delaware are kind, and I did it on a split shift with a clean pair of scrubs in the back seat. Dean's call had been 2 short sentences and no explanation at all. Come see her. Just come see her, Myra. Marion does not change. The same water tower, the same brick storefronts with the same 3 of them empty, the same dairy whip with the same hand-painted cone. There was a new truck in the driveway on Bellefontaine, a big one, silver, and I knew before I read the plate frame that my brother's name was on the note for it, because that is how this family finances things. My mother was on the front porch in a metal chair with a cardigan across her knees and a needle in her hand. She was sewing. That's what it looked like from the sidewalk. From the steps you could see the needle was going in and out of the same half-inch of fabric, over and over, the way a record skips. She heard me and looked up. She looked at me for a long time, the way you look at somebody in a grocery store when you can't place them. She was polite. My mother has been polite her entire life, and she is going to be polite until the last week of it. And then she asked me, in the gentlest voice, "Are you the one who pays?" I stood on my parents' front steps in Marion, Ohio, and I said, "Yes, ma'am." Because it was true, and because there was nothing else in the English language available to me. She nodded like a woman who had finally gotten a straight answer out of somebody, and she went back to her half-inch of fabric. The screen door was propped open with a brick. I went inside. There was a hospital bed in the living room. It was where the recliner used to be, angled toward the television, with a mattress pad still in its plastic sleeve and a bed rail folded down. And honestly, that made sense to me. That is a thing families do, and it is usually the first correct decision they make. I stood there and had one clean second of thinking, all right, they are doing this properly. Then I walked down the hall, because I wanted to see if the hallway still had the dent in the drywall from when Dean threw a cleat, and I went past the bathroom, and the door at the end was open. That room was mine from age 4 to age 18. The closet was empty, not tidied, empty, and wiped out, with the rod bare and 4 wire hangers on the floor. And in the middle of that room, where my bed used to be, there was a bed. Not a hospital bed. A single, brand new, with a cheap pine headboard and a mattress still in the store bag, and sheets folded on top of it with the fold creases from the package still in them. There was a cardboard box leaning against the wall behind it with the shipping label facing out, and I did what I do, which is read the label. Delivery date. 9 days before that dinner. And on the line where it says who it goes to, in a warehouse font, ATTN M. Ingram. 9 days before my father called me for the first time in 3 years, somebody in this house had ordered a bed with my initial on the paperwork, and by the time I sat down at that table and ordered a glass of water, it had already been delivered, carried down that hallway, and made up with new sheets. I did not touch it. I want you to hold that room in your head for the rest of this, because I have not been able to put it down. And behind me, from the far end of the hall, my father said, "Good, you found it." We had it in the kitchen, standing up, because my father does not sit down for conversations he considers settled. He laid it out for me the way he used to lay out a job on Monday morning, and I want you to understand that he was not angry, and he was not embarrassed. He was reasonable. An aide from an agency runs $28 an hour. 40 hours a week is about $4,800 a month, and they don't have $4,800 a month. They have his disability and her nothing. A facility is $7,800 a month, and there's a waiting list, and the good one is in Delaware. "You're a nurse," he said. "You already do this for strangers." That was it. That was the whole argument. And he said it the way you'd point out that a hose is on the wrong side of the house. I asked why nobody had called me in 3 years if this was the plan, and he said, "You made yourself hard to call." I asked about the dinner. $6,000, Dad. Why? And he looked at me with something that I think, honestly, was disappointment. And he said, "I wanted to see if you'd still act like family." He never mentioned the bill again. Not once. Not that day. Not since. It was a test. It cost him nothing, because he was never going to pay it, and it told him what he wanted to know in 11 seconds flat, and I had failed it in front of witnesses he had assembled for exactly that purpose. Then I asked him who called the bank about a hardship deferral 14 months ago. He did not deny it. He did not even slow down. He said, "The bank offered it." Dean walked me out, which in that family is an act of enormous courage. He apologized 3 times in the driveway, and every apology was a delivery mechanism for a piece of information. "Sorry, Myra, but there was a meeting in March. All of them, at the house. And there was a plan by the end of it. Sorry, but Faye's the one who said you'd say no. Sorry, but Dad's had the county out twice already." I asked him if he knew about the bed. He looked at the truck. That was the answer. Then he told me the truth. And it is the only genuinely honest thing my brother said to me all year. "If it's not you, it's me," he said. "I've got Steph, and Hallie's got 2 years left at home, and I'm already on the note for that truck. If you get out, I'm next. That's just how it goes." He said it like a weather report. Then he said the sentence that finally made me understand what I was dealing with, which was not a cruel father, and a greedy aunt. It's a rotation, Myra. You just missed your turn for 3 years? I asked him one more thing. I asked how Faye knew about my 2 beds. Dean rubbed the back of his neck and said Dad found it himself, at the library, on the computer, because an application for a licensed 2-bed home in the state of Ohio is a public filing with a name on it. My name. He typed it in to see what I was doing with my life, and the state handed him a business plan. So there it was. I drove 47 miles back down 23 to Columbus, and I could not tell you one thing about that drive, not a single exit. I got to my apartment, sat down on the floor in the hallway with my coat still on, and stayed there long enough that the automatic lights in the stairwell went out. 4 days later, my work phone rang while I was charting in a driveway in Westerville, and the screen said Marion County. I almost let it go. The woman said her name was Priscilla Vance and she was an assessor with the county, and she had the specific voice of a person who has this same conversation 9 times a day and has decided to be neither warm nor cold about it, because both of those get used against her. She said, "I'm calling to verify the in-home caregiver listed on Loretta Ingalls' assessment." I said, "All right." She said, "The record shows the primary in-home caregiver as Myra Ingalls, registered nurse, live-in, beginning the 1st of next month." I sat in a stranger's driveway with a laptop on my knees and a cold coffee in the cup holder, and I could not make a sound come out. She waited. She is good at waiting. I imagine that's most of the job. Then she said, "Ma'am, are you the caregiver of record?" And I want to be honest with you about what happened in my chest, because I have replayed it more than I have replayed the steakhouse. It was not rage. It was the specific vertigo of hearing your own name read back to you off a document you have never seen, in a plan you were never asked about, for a life that starts on the 1st of the month. The plan had a start date. The bed had been delivered. The room had been emptied. Somebody had answered a county assessor's questions on my behalf in my parents' living room, out loud with my license listed, and then 2 weeks later bought me dinner and handed me the check. I asked her to read me exactly what was in the file, and to her enormous credit, she did. There was no signature of mine anywhere, nothing forged, nothing faked. During the home interview, when she asked who would be providing the daily care, my father answered, and my mother nodded along, and Faye was in the room and confirmed it, and my father gave my full name, my profession, and my license number. A nursing license number is public. Anybody can look up mine in about 9 seconds, and my father had already learned that week how good the state of Ohio is at answering questions about me. So it was not a crime. I want to be precise about this, because I spent an entire night hoping it was one. It was a statement made by a family about a woman who was not in the room, and the county had written it down the way counties do, and now it was a fact with a start date attached to it. Vance told me she needed a yes or a no. She said the file could not sit in limbo, that she had a deadline on her end, and that she needed my answer by the 30th. Then she said the thing that kept me up. "I do want you to understand what happens if the arrangement isn't accurate. We can't just cross out a line. The application restarts from the beginning." I asked how long a restart takes. She said it varies. She said in Marion County, right now, it takes a while. I asked what happens to my mother in the meantime, and Priscilla Vance said, in the flattest, kindest voice I have ever heard, that would depend on the family. I called my father and said I wanted to talk, and he picked the place, which I should have found strange, and didn't. There is a monument yard on the north side of Marion, out past the grain elevator, a gravel lot with maybe 200 headstones standing in rows like a crop. He was waiting by the office in his work coat even though he has not worked in 10 years. He walked me down the 3rd row, and he stopped in front of a granite marker with his mother's name on it, my grandmother, who died the year I was 15. He was 44 that year. He put 2 fingers on the top edge of that stone the same way he had put 2 fingers on that leather folder, and he told me about the funeral. $9,200, which in this county in that year was an obscene amount of money for a woman who cleaned rooms at a motel out on Route 4. He said his brothers gave him $100 apiece, and then never mentioned it again. He said he paid the funeral home $45 a month, every month, and he refinanced it twice, and he made the last payment 2 years ago, at 61 years old. 17 years. I stood in a gravel lot in the wind and looked at a man's swollen hands and understood something I did not want to understand, which is that my father does not think a thing like that is a tragedy. He thinks it is a credential. Nobody carried it with him, and he never asked anyone to, and he is proud of it in a way that has fused to his spine. He said, "Nobody helped me, I never asked. That's the difference between you and me." And then, because he is who he is, he used it. He turned around in that gravel and gave me the list, and he gave it like a materials order. 1. I move into the back bedroom by the first, and I do the mornings, the medications, the bathing, and the nights. 2. I bring the line of credit current and keep it current, because the house is the collateral and the house is her home. 3. I call Priscilla Vance back and tell her the arrangement on that assessment is correct, so the application does not restart. And in return, he said, I would be home. He actually used that word. Then he said the sentence I have heard at every funeral, every wedding, every kitchen table, every hospital waiting room of my entire life, and he said it in a monument yard standing in front of his mother's headstone, which I think is the only time it has ever been said in its natural habitat. Family is the only insurance we ever had. And then he added a clause I had never heard him add before, and it is the clause that told me the whole shape of the thing. You want to be family? Then be the policy. I asked him what happens if I say no. He did not hesitate. He does not bluff, either. That is the terrible thing about my father. He has never once needed to bluff. He said, then your name goes down with the house. Which is not a threat. It's a forecast. 3 missed payments. An interest bomb from a deferral nobody was going to cure. A house with no income behind it, and 3 names on the paper. Mine was the only one with anything left to take. 2 days later, I drove up at 7 in the morning, because early is when she is clearest, and everybody who has ever done this work knows that, and almost nobody outside it does. I let myself in through the kitchen. My father was still asleep. My mother was awake in the hospital bed in the living room, with the rail down and the television off. And when I came around the corner, she said, Myra. Just my name, correct, first try. I got about half an hour. She talked about a wool coat she took in for a woman named Dorothy Field in 1988, and how the woman wanted the shoulders narrowed and it ruined the line, and she did it anyway, because the customer is the customer. She laughed. She asked me if I was still doing nights, and told me I looked tired, which is the most maternal sentence available in the English language. And because I am a coward in exactly one specific way, I waited until minute 26 to ask her the question I have wanted to ask somebody in that family for 10 years. I said, Mom, did you ever think it was too much? What they asked me for? She took my hand. Her hand was cool and light, and she held on with real strength, and she looked right at me with her whole face, and she said gently, like she was explaining something obvious to a child she loved, but honey, you were the one who could. I sat there, and I understood finally that nobody in that house had ever been lying to me. Not once. Not about any of it. They believed it. It was the arrangement. It had been the arrangement since I was 24 years old and probably since I was 7. A debt with a last name. Then something went out of her eyes like a light on a timer, and she looked at me politely, and she said, Are you the one who pays? I drove back down 23 that morning doing arithmetic I am not proud of. $61,400 on one side, my mother's next 10 years on the other. If you have ever had to put a price on your own family, put a single word in the comments so I know I'm not the only one. And subscribe, because I did something with that number I cannot take back. I called Priscilla Vance from the parking garage at the hospital on Kenny Road on a 15-minute break, standing between a pillar and a minivan, because that is where the signal is. I told her the truth. I said the assessment is not accurate. I said I am not the live-in caregiver. I have never agreed to be. I was not present when that was stated, and I am not going to be. I said it once, and I did not decorate it. Then I told her the other thing, because I am still a nurse and my mother is still my mother. I said, I have seen her twice in the last 2 weeks, and I will tell you exactly what I saw, and I will put it in writing if it helps. Because whatever this family has told you about how she is doing is going to be optimistic, and she needs more help than they said she does. Vance said, Thank you. That's actually useful. Then she said she would document it and the file would be updated and the application would go back to the start, and she thanked me for my time, and she hung up, and I stood in a parking garage next to a minivan with a stick figure family on the back window. That is what it sounds like when you end the first 34 years of your life. It sounds like a woman saying thank you. That's actually useful. Because that was the moment, not the steakhouse. Everything before that call I could still have walked back. I could have moved into that bedroom, hated it, and been the good daughter in Marion, Ohio, forever. And everybody in that town would have said what a blessing that girl came home. 2 hours later, my phone had 14 missed calls on it and one text from my Aunt Faye, and it said, You just put your mother in a nursing home. Hope you can live with it. The next 6 days were the worst mail I have ever received. Faye told the prayer chain, and I know she did, because I am still on it. And by Wednesday, I was the one who called the county. Not a name, a description. Dean sent one line. You didn't have to do that. Steph sent a long, kind message that helped nothing at all and cost her nothing at all, which is most kindness. My father did not call. That is his most effective move, and he knows it. And on Thursday night, at 10:40, an email came in from the bank with the payoff statement I had requested 9 days earlier and then not opened. Payoff amount, $59,715. Good through the 30th. After that date, they'd have to recalculate with per diem interest, and the late fees would have compounded again. I sat down at my kitchen table on the second floor in Clintonville with a glass of water, because I had gotten superstitious about drinking anything else, and I opened my business account on my laptop and put the two numbers next to each other, 61,400, 59,715. I did the subtraction one time, out loud, in an empty apartment. $1,685. That is what would be left of 6 years of nights. Then I closed the laptop because deciding at 11 at night is not deciding, it is flinching, and I went and stood in my own doorway and looked at nothing for a while. Two things were true about the next morning. The 30th was the last day the payoff quote was good, and my father had already called a family meeting at the house in Marion for 11 o'clock that same morning and told everybody it was about their mother. I was in the parking lot of the branch on Grandview Avenue at 8:58 in the morning, in scrubs, because I had a shift at 2, and I was not going to lose the pay. I went in when they unlocked the door. The banker was maybe 30, very polite, and he pulled the account up and read the payoff back to me. $59,715. Good today. I moved it from the business account. It took less time than parking had. Then I told him I wanted 3 things in writing before I left that building. The account paid in full. The line of credit closed, permanently, not left open with a zero balance where anybody with a name on it could draw it up again, and a letter stating that I am released from further obligation on it, with a note about when the lien release would be recorded at the county. He asked me, in the nicest possible way, whether I was sure about closing it, because a lot of families like to keep a line open for emergencies. And I said, No, close it. He printed 2 pages. Timestamp on the receipt, 9:04 in the morning. Then I sat in my car in that lot and made 2 phone calls, and those were harder than anything that happened later that day. I called the landlord in Grandview and let the lease go, and the $9,000 in deposits went with it. Then I called Nadine, and then I called Tomas. And I told them there would be no job on the 1st, and I used the voice I use at 2 in the morning with families, because it is the only voice I have for that, and I do not have another one. Nadine said, Okay, honey, okay. Tomas did not say anything for a while, and then asked if he should call his old supervisor back today, or wait until Monday. 6 years. 2 phone calls. Then I drove 47 miles north with an envelope on the passenger seat, and I had not told a single human being what I had done. There were 9 people in that living room, which I want you to appreciate as a piece of craftsmanship, because he had gotten the same number as the steakhouse. My father, standing. My mother in the hospital bed with the head raised, awake, tracking about half of it. Dean on the arm of the couch. Steph. Hallie on the floor with her back against the bookcase. Faye and Gil in the 2 kitchen chairs somebody had carried in. Brennan Ott, who has been the pastor at their church for 11 years, and who did not want to be there, in the recliner they had moved against the wall. And Priscilla Vance, on a folding chair by the door with a file folder squared on her knees, because my father had invited the county to watch him fix his family. Nobody offered me a seat. I took the ottoman. He did it standing, and he did it well. He was not loud. He said his wife was sick and getting sicker. He said an agency was $28 an hour and a facility was $7,800 a month. And he said those numbers with the confidence of a man who had finally found figures that agreed with him. He said the back bedroom was ready. He said the first of the month. He said the line of credit needed to be brought current and there was one person in the room with a nurse's paycheck. He said the county file had an error in it that his daughter had put there, and that could be corrected today with one phone call. And he looked at Vance when he said it, and Vance wrote something down and did not look up. Faye said, "Amen." Nobody looked at me the entire time he was talking. He finished with his hands open at his sides, and he said, "So, are we a family or not?" I did not stand up. I have thought about that a lot since, and I think standing up is what you do when you need the room. I did not need the room. I reached into my bag and took out the envelope and took out the 2 pages, and I leaned forward and put them on the coffee table, side by side, turned around so that they faced my father. Then I sat back on that ottoman with my hands in my lap. Faye leaned in first. My father did not, because he was still standing and he was not going to bend over for anything, so he read them from where he was, upside down, at a distance, which is a thing my father can actually do, and I watched him do it. The first page was the payment receipt. $59,715 this morning, 9:04. The second page was the letter. Account paid in full. Line of credit closed at the borrower's request. Borrower Myra Ingalls released from further obligation. Lien release to be recorded with the county. I said 3 sentences, and I said them slowly, and I did not raise my voice. The line is paid off. The line is closed. The house is free and clear, as of 9 o'clock this morning. Nobody clapped. I want to be honest about that too, because I have watched enough of these stories to know what you are expecting. Nobody in that room cheered, and nobody gasped, and nobody said good for you. Faye understood it a full second before my father did, and she stopped breathing, and her mouth moved without anything coming out of it. Pastor Ott looked down at the carpet and stayed there. Priscilla Vance uncapped her pen and wrote one line. My mother said, to nobody in particular, "That's nice." And then my father got to the second page and he read the word closed, and I watched the arithmetic land behind his eyes. Not paid. Closed. There was nothing left on that house to draw from, and there never would be again, and every name on it, including his, was off it forever. He stood up straighter. Then he came apart. My father yelled at me for the first time in my life in front of 9 people and a county employee. 63 years old?